Welcome to The Art of Growth. This is Jim Zartman, and today, Joel Hubbard and I are having a conversation about belonging with our friend Hillary Kay from Hillary Kay Coaching, who we've been doing a good amount of corporate work with, and she was out here, so we sat down and recorded a couple episodes. So today, the three of us are going to be talking about this theme that we've been having a lot of conversations behind the scenes about identity, belonging, and contribution. And we're going to be exploring identity today. But before we get into that, I wanted to let you know that we want to get together with as many people who are listeners of The Art of Growth as possible to close out this year. And we're going to do that next Tuesday night, December 6th. And that's going to be hosted by the Art of Growth community. There will be a newsletter that goes out this week with an invite in it, so you can sign up for that. Join Joel and Lisa and I live, and we will be on the theme that the Art of Growth community is on right now, which is release. And we are going to release at the end of the year, but we're going to have a discussion about it as a group. So come hang out with us live for the night, and you can sign up for that in the link that will be out in the newsletter this week. But for now, my friends, let's jump into this conversation that I had with Joel and Hillary. So Saturday morning, I was with Vera, my daughter, who's 9, and we get in some kind of a tiff. And so a lot of times we'll just kind of go to our separate corners. But this time I was like, no, we need to work this out. But like I've told a lot of other people, you can't just sometimes sit at home and work something out. So I was like, put on your shoes. We're going for a walk. So we walk, and we're walking down to the beach, and we're starting this conversation. And I was sharing some of the things I was witnessing. And somehow we got on this who are you and who you're becoming question. And she shared this concerns about, well, if I do this, I'm afraid that I won't be myself anymore. If I do that, I feel like I'm not going to be myself. And I'm like, what? Where did this come from? What does that even mean? But one of the most fascinating things about parenting is you're watching an identity being discovered and constructed. And it's that dual thing of discovered and constructed. And I was trying to explain to her, I was like, every day, every decision you make, you are constructing the person that you are. But there's also someone that she obviously was just born as. And we talk about this in the Enneagram world, that believe you're born your type. You seem to be predisposed to just being who you are. But then it goes and it meets the external world, and there's all of this stuff. And so you're kind of jumping in as listeners to an hour-long conversation we've already been having, trying to say, how do we name this thing? How do we talk about this thing? And so we're going to continue to go looking for it in front of you. But we're trying to talk about this first piece, which is this identity piece, which we're trying to figure out. Yeah.
There's always an idea, and I don't know, I would love to hear from some smarter people who have done a lot of work on this, but there's a sense at which we are drawn to an ideal past or an ideal future. At some point, things were a certain way. It may not even be our reality. That may never have actually happened. And I think it's caught in some of the sacred literature that's out there, depending upon, your faith background. It's certainly caught in the Christian and Jewish scriptures with Genesis and the sort of there's this ideal state at which all things begin. And I think to some degree it's both that it captures that sense of there's an ideal past and there's an ideal future. Something that if you get there, you will have this sense of home. You will have this sense of, I have finally arrived. I finally belong. I finally am complete. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I think that's part of that goes to your starting point of, all reality is both discovered and constructed. I think that's just fundamental to things. The old trick question, mathematical question is, was math discovered or invented? And nobody has an answer to that. It's both, right? But then you think about anything in life, it's kind of a bit of both. It's a discovery, including our identity, our sense of who we are. It's in part, there's material there, and in part, there's construction that is also happening.
I think naturally we're always looking for a framework on whatever, at least, I mean, I shouldn't say we all, but I certainly, am looking for a framework. And I think a lot of when you were telling that story about Vera, I think that was her search for a framework of like, how do I operate? How do I go about, my identity? Is it something I find? Is it something I have? And I think to your point, Joel, it's both.
Yeah.
You have it, like you're born with, you are who you are. But if we stay where we are and we don't move and twist and turn, right? We need that discovery as well, and the freedom to have that discovery process. And I think what you gave Vera, Jim, is that freedom to, you don't have to be like, this is your starting place, but you can move around.
Yeah, but how comforting is that to everyone? Do you think some would be like, oh no, I need a fixed, either external, like I need you to tell me who I am, or I need to find the true me some other way?
Yeah, well, that's why I always think that whole question about like, who am I isn't a super helpful question, because it's a better question to ask, who am I becoming? Sometimes I feel like the question, who am I, it's almost too nebulous or existential to actually answer. But if we include identity as an act of will, or an aspect of it as an act of will, then we're actually taking ownership of it. We're not just like responding to it. We're not thinking that it's a fixed identity, like some past thing you're talking about, which is nostalgia. And sometimes the looking backwards is, we look back and we go, okay, there's key things we want to preserve, and that's a good thing. But there's also sometimes this idealization, like even in the story you mentioned, of Genesis, like I think there's a perception that it was like an ideal state, but I think even that's an interpretation, because you could look at it and be like, well, it's in a garden, but then before you know it, there's like cities that can handle like more people.
Oh, absolutely.
Intricacies.
Well, isn't it always true that like we prefer a state of naivete in some sense of like, I don't know, and everything is just perfect and ideal and wonderful. And yet the fact that sometimes that gets messed up actually produces something great in the end. Like we're actually better on the other side oftentimes of a certain kind of chaos that has entered into our little garden.
Yeah.
Which is also, again, it's part of the formation of who am I and what am I becoming?
I wonder if different types like ask that question differently. Because you are, like you see any kid you're around, they're trying to figure out who they are.
What I think is important to realize is, and what we're talking about is, identity isn't found in adjectives. Like you can't say, like when you answer the question, who am I? Well, I am smart. I'm insightful. I am a good friend. I am a excellent mother, whatever. Though that's not my identity. Those are describing words. And I think when you ask questions like, who am I? Or who are you? Or who is that person? That question welcomes adjectives.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't welcome.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It doesn't welcome the true core. Like so when I think of identity, it's like
what's the difference to you in terms of like, so because you hear people do that all the time, and then people saying like, my identity is even like a pronoun, like a title, like I'm a dad or I'm a mom.
Right, because that's what I think that's what we're trained to do. But to me, identity is, and I mean, this is spoken from a true heart type, identity is a feeling. Like it's like this, how I feel, how they feel.
That's
like
interesting.
That, like, no. It's like almost like a confidence, like I can't find the word.
The confidence. No, but that's interesting. You're talking about it as a feeling. And for me, it's like you are what you do, right? So it's action. The actions you take construct the person you are.
So for you, a consistency in the area of action gives you a better sense of
identity. Yeah.
Identity.
I am what I do. Yeah. And the construction of me is not just in my interests and the things that I do as far as like the actions that I take or the external things I participate in, but identity is the person who shows up to those things and how I show up to those things. And do I show up to those things in an intentional way, in being the kind of person I want to be? Mm-hmm. Do I create the space between us that I think is important and right to create?
Mm-hmm. And what's the result of that internally for you?
Internally is like, okay, I did a good job.
Yeah, and I'm very much the same. That's what internally as I did a good job, but it is more about like the energy I'm bringing. It's not setting up the action. It's setting up the intention. I don't know, maybe that is the action. But I always, and this is a word that has come up for me a lot lately, is energy. And I want to make sure the energy is balanced within myself. Like I am coming to it with the right intentions, energy. I don't know.
You know, we were saying like there's a sense at which the opposite of that is like a sense of disorientation. I'm off balance. Some people will say that. Like I feel off balance. And I don't use that term. I don't use balance. For me, that's never been something that I either internally feel or externally look for. There's nothing about balance that's interesting to me or that relates to me. So I don't use balance. But I know a ton of people that have used that word. Like I feel off balance or I feel disoriented. Disoriented I can totally relate to.
Yeah.
But there's an internal, we're trying to name some internal experience, right? It's really tough. It's really tough to name that thing that feels like this is my identity and there's a sense of belonging to that identity.
Well, I like your thing about the whole where am I? So there is an orientation aspect to this because I was just thinking about when you were saying that, visiting another country where everyone around me is speaking a different language and I'm alone in that group of people and I'm just trying to figure out like how do I operate in this space? And basically that's how all of us are dropped into this planet.
Oh,
like
yes.
we don't speak the language, we don't speak it all.
Yeah.
Like where am I? Yeah. Because we've just like come out of comfort and now we're thrust into this world and we're going, crap, where am I? What is going on? How am I going to get my needs met? How am I part of this thing? And then the older you get, the questions get more and more complex. Like, oh no, now I need to add to this space. And who am I going to connect to? What is that going to be like in between those things? And all of this is like you're trying to unravel and build this thing as you go. And some people never move past those kind of early stages. But like it should get to the point where you're asking those higher questions. But we dropped into this place. Like what the hell are we doing here?
Yeah. We've all heard about mirror neurons. It's like your brain has them. Or the brains have them, and there's a sense at which we're trying to align with other people. There's a synchronicity we're looking for with other humans. But then we also have an ego, and that thing doesn't look for synchronicity all the time. It looks for its own.
I was going to say for yourself. It looks out for
it's very self-protective.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think there's a little bit of a battle. But I want to ask this question about: do we feel belonging when we belong? Or is what we feel a lack of belonging when something has happened to us? Is that really the conversation? Because I don't remember times when everything is fine, when I feel what I would now call I felt a sense of belonging.
Right.
I wasn't thinking in the terms of do I belong or do I not belong. It's just not an issue. It's not a thing.
When we're talking about the construction of identity, the person you are now would not belong in those same situations then that created the belonging then.
I wouldn't belong there anymore. Yeah,
exactly. I think that's a component,
and that
too.
would threaten my own sense of belonging to myself.
Yeah,
if I'm prolonged in an environment where that would be true.
Right.
Going back to my past, as you were just describing. Yeah.
But you're talking about the two things. You're talking about the mirror neurons, and I think this is a really important thing that it happens as we're trying to figure out this identity piece, the orientation. It's that leaning in and pulling out. It's the waves. It's the tide moving toward and the tide moving away. I'm moving toward you. I'm like, who am I with you? Who am I in this place? Who am I around these people? Like, how do I have belonging connection with all of you? Testing, how do I live in this space? And what do I need to do to live in this space? And then certain things or a violation can happen, something that happens, you're like, that doesn't feel good, or an injustice occurs, and there's a complete pull back and go, okay, well, but I need to come back to myself, and I need to go, well, who am I apart from this? And sometimes that's a hard imagination for some people to have. Like, who am I if this was not my setting, if these were not my people, if I didn't belong here anymore, who would I be then?
Yeah.
It's a terrifying question.
I mean, that is...
You had a moment of terror in your face there.
That's my identity story.
Yeah.
Sure.
for so long, when you are in a place of where you feel like you belong for so long, that becomes your identity. That belonging becomes your identity. That group of people becomes who you are in a sense. So when you look at it, it's an extension of who you are. And then when that event, like how you were just saying, Jim, occurs, and you're like, ooh, I don't know who I am then without these people or without this thing or without this place. Like, what's then that process? That's where I get stuck, is go back to the framework. Okay, give me the framework so I can find myself again. Because I don't know. And even now, like, I've gone in and out of, belonging, and you still ask me that question now, and it's been, years since the situation, and I still times have a hard time answering that question, who I am without that. Because it still is a part of me.
That's the thing. It's like, how do I acknowledge this is still a part of me? But we have lots of people who follow this podcast who grew up in faith traditions that they no longer entirely identify with. So they're like, who am I? And this is a dual question, right? Who am I now without this belief? Because the belief was a core component of this identity. And who am I now without these people who were the people in a lot of ways that formed me? Like, when people say, who are you? Like, I could tell you, the people that formed me, they had a huge impact on who I've become. Like, there's an aspect of me that they're like, people who haven't seen me in years, like, oh, you're still you. But then there's another aspect where they're like, but you've changed in these ways. And I think, like, that dual thing of, like, the internal and the external it really shows up in that space.
The liminal space, like that in between, which is my least favorite place to be.
Hey, so I needed to pop into the middle of this episode to remind you that if you are wanting to use the Enneagram more in your own life, become more proficient in it, and would like to learn from us about how to do that, the Art of Growth certification course is starting this January 2023 and will run for 12 weeks. And you can sign up for that at theartofgrowth.org under the classes and events section. So go to our website and sign up and become certified with us before it's too late. All right, back to the show, folks.
So I think of, the loss again of that sense of connection, belonging, that group, the people, the environment, whatever it was that you were thrust out of. This is the idea of the exile. So, like, there's lots in our tradition, the sort of Christian, evangelical, Jewish, religious tradition of thinking about exile and return. And the exile, it begins really for us experientially at birth, because we're exiled from the mother's womb, where there was complete and total connection, and we're thrust out. And that's our first experience of losing that. And then there's this individuation, and then back to, community, and back to individuation, and back to community thing that happens. And I think it's all part of this idea of the exile, because the exile is you're pushed out, and we think of the exile as a bad thing. Like, oh no, I've lost something. Now I've lost who I am, or I've lost my sense of identity. And yet, I think that there's something to exile that allows us to actually dive more deeply into who am I apart from these people. And yet it's not entirely possible to form an identity outside of people, right? So I love Daniel Siegel's stuff on that whole subject, because I think it makes a lot of sense that we form who we are based on a lot of our environment. And so it's not a fixed identity in that sense. There's a creation of who we are. And that is why when we're with different groups of different people that we've had over the course of our lives, they pull at different sides of us. It's not just that we're adapting to fit, it's that there's also something that's being pulled out of us internally that are different aspects of who we are. And to say that that's not a part of us, I don't know that we can all the time. There are parts of us that we definitely realize in the exile, like, oh, that wasn't part of me. And I think that's the gift of the exile, is like, what are the parts that you've accumulated that you now can discard? It's not about whether it was true or not true. It's about these things have accumulated, and where I'm going next, this part of me I can let go of. I can make peace with it and just release it.
Yeah, but I think there's also like, that was a part of me, but that's a part I still want to use, just not in the same way. And what's that process look like? There's some like, that was a part of me, like that doesn't feel good to me anymore. And I don't want to welcome that back. Like I needed to exile that. And that needs to stay away. But then there's parts where you do exile because you need to come back to self. Like you need to be in your most raw, pure form. Like, who am I without all of this? So you push it all away. But in the process of reforming your identity, changing, discovering this, who you are now, there's parts that you may have exiled and look at that and like, ooh, that part, I kind of missed that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like how it was used over there.
Yeah.
Or maybe I even like how it was used over there, but I'm not sure how to use it.
That's really good.
Here.
Yeah. I had a older friend who had talked to me about like the seasons of expansion and seasons of contraction, where at certain times you're expanding into, more influence, more whatever it may be. And you're around more people and you're taking in more. There's this expansion. Then there's seasons of the contraction. You were talking about like you're pulling away and you're going, well, but who am I away from all this? And I don't know if it's who I am away from all this, but it's really a check-in with saying like, okay, of all that stuff I just experienced, what do I actually want to keep? What do I still think is valuable? And what am I good letting go? I think a lot of people are coming to this point. There's like an energy around this concept to me right now that they've left something. There's somewhere they used to belong and they no longer do. It could be a work thing. It could be a spiritual thing. It could be a relationship. I've left this thing, and they're asking the who am I now question. But one of those things they have to check in is like, what do I actually want to carry with me into the next thing?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the difference between the question you ask, like, who am I versus who do I want to be?
Yeah.
Like, that's the difference there. And maybe that's the better question to ask instead of when we're asking people, who are you? Or, what is your identity? Like, what do you want to be? What do you want your identity to be?
Yeah.
That, and also I think another question I've been playing with is, what is being birthed in you? What's coming up?
What's coming up for you in this moment?
Yeah. Because I think every time we think, we do get stuck sometimes in more of a static way of thinking and viewing the world. Things are fixed, and there's nothing fixed. All reality is movement.
It's easier that way.
Yeah.
It's easier to have a fixed point of view. You don't have to do any work. It's there for you. It's the framework. It's the box.
I love the John O'Donohue and David White and how they speak of conversation. Like, all of reality is a conversation, and what forms is from that conversation, whether you're having it or not having it. And even thinking of organic life, if you have a tree that is planted and starts to grow in one environment, it would look completely different in many regards. It would still be a tree, but it would look different if it was planted in a different environment because it's having a conversation with that environment.
With the landscape.
With the landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think about, like, that's who we are very much, is that there's material that is true to who we are. We're still a tree. We're still whatever we are. And yet there's this conversation, and are we having it? And so that question of movement, what am I saying when I say, who am I? Am I looking for something fixed?
Yeah.
Or is it, what is being birthed in me? What's coming up in me? What's that thing that's happening right now? What am I seeing? And I think that that's a tougher question in some regards, but I think it's also more accessible. It's less nebulous and less abstract. It's much more of what is happening event-wise in your life right now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm struggling with this. Okay. Something is forming. Something is becoming.
Yeah.
In some sense, things are also passing. Things are dying. Things are being let go of. And I think that that's part of the point of the exile, really is about not trying to figure out who you are in the sense of a fixed identity.
Yeah.
But what is happening right now? What are the things that are being removed and what are being added? Not what am I through my willpower trying to control, or, abdicating our responsibility to the environment. It's like, it's everybody's fault. And, I'm struggling because nobody likes me, nobody accepts me. And it's much more of no, I have to enter in, and I have to enter into this wrestling, into this conversation. And it's extraordinarily difficult and painful. But what is this about?
The question of identity can never be removed from responsibility.
Oh
As
my
you were
gosh.
just talking
Yeah.
about objecting,
Yes.
getting rid of that responsibility. Like identity cannot be removed from the questions of responsibility.
100%.
I remember talking to a friend of mine and who is in a lot of conflict with her spouse. And the day that I knew their relationship was over was when she said, like, this is where I've discovered who I am. And so this is what I need to work on. And this is what I need to do. And she's like, well, when I have this conversation with him, he's just like, well, this is just who I am and it's not going to change. It's like, so for him, there was no responsibility of his identity and he saw it as fixed. People who don't take any responsibility and they perceive their responsibility as fixed, I was like, that relationship has no hope. Because like you can't move forward if that's a fixed state, because then everyone else is forced to adapt to you because you are suddenly the immovable object. And for her, she was like, this is the stage of evolution I'm at. And this is what drives me crazy in the Enneagram world when they're like, well, I can't help it. I'm just a whatever type they are. And like, but I'm like, no, what kind of that type are you going to be? Because I've seen beautiful versions of every type.
Yes.
And I've seen versions of every type that I do not ever want to be around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, you want to know the orientation of where you are on the map. This is why we've said like your type is the you are here spot on the map. It's not your landing place, it's your launch pad. We use all of this language to say, okay, get oriented, right? But if you just say, I live on the launch pad, you're not a rocket. You're a really bad house. Like
Really bad house.
that full of combustible engine that could go off at any point in time. Maybe I'm taking the analogy too far. But I'm comfortable with that. But like I said, like that is the difference, is that responsibility piece. Orientation, responsibility is an enormous part of identity.
Yeah. And it's coupled with agency, because I think part of the lack of responsibility some people take is a feeling that they don't have agency. It's like who I am is as a result of my environment. It's a result of everybody else, you know, and there's both. I think agency and responsibility go hand in hand. It's, I am this. Oh, that's because of how I'm responding or reacting to the world around me. Oh, wow. So I have agency. Now am I going to take responsibility and do something about it? And I think that's important.
And like there's no point A to point B in identity and like finding your identity. Just like how you don't want to stay at your starting point, you don't necessarily want to stay at point B of your identity journey either. One of you asked me recently, like, who do you see yourself being in the future? Like, where do you see yourself? And the thing that came up for me is I don't know. I just know how it feels. I don't know that. And I think there's freedom in that, and freedom
Huge
in
freedom.
knowing that there's not even an ending point.
No.
Yeah.
Good.
That we are continually going. And so that freedom of transformation, that freedom of growth, and that there's no starting point and ending point. And we like to see the world that way because it's easier.
Yeah.
I think that freedom empowers responsibility.
To live, what do you mean by that? To live in the now? To live
it allows you to say
responsible to what is present right here?
Well, it makes it less idealistic that there's a certain place I have to achieve. Like it has to look a certain way. That there's not this idealistic version of like what I have to become. Because if there's any kind of idealistic version, it's probably superimposed by some other, either by ego or some external structure or whatever. But understanding that you have complete freedom in this construction allows you to be like, okay, then I can take responsibility. I think responsibility alone feels weighty. At least to me it does. But I think if you say that there's like this freedom to construct it I don't know, it just changes the energetic relationship
need
with
that
it.
word.
What?
Responsibility.
But you also need freedom. You can't have one without the other.
No, I know. But if I'm going to push anything, you know me as a 7, if I'm going to push anything, I'm going to push the edge of freedom.
Sure.
But that freedom is actually, right? You're the opposite.
I'm the complete opposite.
Yeah. You go to responsibility.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been one of the things that's been helpful. I heard a certain podcaster call it your burden. And for some people, they wouldn't like the sound of that. For me, that gave weight to me, which is what I needed. Because otherwise, the freedom can feel like a balloon. It's just floating upwards, like wonderful. Yeah, I'm free. But there's in that, you can get lost as at least my type can, in never actually constructing or moving something forward in a way that really does produce a better outcome, So I think the conversation with what is it that, and I loved how you put that, Hillary, that there's no it, there's no there's no arrival at something, that there's a what am I now? What is, because I think that is the conversation with reality. That's the conversation with the events, with the circumstances, as opposed to the idealism that can sometimes look past the reality of your current, I find so much of the time we're not actually really dealing with what is in front of us right now. Like, what is it that, in the sense of either we're controlling it or trying to fix it or ignoring it entirely, playing victim to it or trying to save other people from it, instead of actually engaging in what is this saying? What am I hearing in this? What is this trying to teach me?
Yeah.
And how do I wrestle with this? And what effect is it having on me, to really have that conversation? And in that conversation, I think that is the here and now. That's this is it. The it isn't some future thing or some passing. This is it right here.
Yeah. This is it right here. So the funny thing that pops into my head when you're saying that is this scene from Crazy Stupid Love, where Ryan Reynolds is trying to work with Steve Carell, whose like life is in shambles. He's like trying to get him to change his life and do all this different stuff. And Steve Carell's like, I don't know if that's really me. And the line that always sticks out in my mind is he goes, the concept of you is very fluid right now.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, if you want the thing you really want, you want your wife back, you want this, you want that. Like, the concept of you is fluid, and we have to do some reconstruction here for you to actually get back to who you actually are.
Yeah.
Because you actually lost your sense of self.
Well, and that makes me think of how you said, like, the comfortable for you is that balloon in the air, that freedom of the balloon in the air.
Sounds
And
free.
I'm thinking, I'm like, no, what's comfortable to me is the weight at the end of the balloon. Like that.
Because that gives you a sense of grounding.
It gives me a sense of grounding. But then what I
sense.
need in my identity journey is for someone like you to come with scissors and go,
float a little. Yeah.
And I think there's
well, I think that's wonderful. That's why.
That's
right.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't feel free to me. That just feels like you're going to get blown by any wind that comes across. Like when he's talking about the balloon, like,
man, that's
the
ride.
That doesn't feel like freedom to me at all.
I know.
Freedom is like,
that.
I am determining the path.
Yeah, for you, it's much more agency.
It's a lot more agency, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, a balloon has no damn agency. It's just floating around, full of air.
Yeah. If I'm that, then that would be bothersome to me too. Because I don't know of any seven that wants to be controlled or by anybody, right? So it's like, no, I want complete agency to be unaffected by anybody else's whims or anybody else. Like, I want to be free because I want to have fun, right? So,
and I want the external validation from someone else to come cut me loose. Like, no, it's okay. You can go explore.
Yeah.
I can't. It's so hard for me to make that decision myself.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's great to have this, because there's different language for different types.
3 different perspectives.
Right? But that it points to something that, has to do with this, this being here, having this conversation with what life is bringing to us, and our ego is going to fight against something that life is presenting to us right now. And that's the part that I think the path is so faithful in is I'm going to keep throwing circumstances your way until you grow past that, and grow through it, because it's for your good, and you do have, I think, on the other side, a deeper sense of restfulness, of being deeply okay, of feeling like you belong.
I think it's a difference in perspective from the world is happening to me instead of the world is happening for me.
Yeah.
Like it's that shift
very
in
much
perspective.
So. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's some people who the world is happening to me. Life is something that's happening to me, instead of like I'm impacting life. Like I'm helping shape this whole thing. So if I drew a thread through everything we've talked about, we started in this place of like, you're this person who steps into the world, and then you're figuring out this internal world while trying to relate to this external world. And the identity is being constructed in that process. But then we also talked about there's these moments that we're exiled, or we've exiled a part of ourselves. We've either been cast out or we've been called out. We've been sort of thrown out there, or we've been invited to something new. And so then there's almost like a pulling back or a leaving home where we have to say, well, what do we want to keep with us? What's still important to us now? What do we still want to hold on to? And then there's the process of like proceeding into the next level of like the internal and how do I relate to this new external? And so that's this ongoing process that I think is being constructed. And I think the points I'd want to reinforce is the responsibility for that construction, that you are an active participant in your identity formation, and that the environments that you put yourself in or that you're around are highly impactful on that.
Yes.
So bring a level of intentionality to that. But it's sort of, if you want to do identity construction well, there is careful attention and intention paid to both the internal and the environmental, the external. As we do that dance and work, then we're starting to construct an identity of a person that we respect.
Ooh.
And that's what I want it to come to. Like, I think all of us, what we want is we want to construct someone that we respect. And I think if we do that, we will say that we have taken the identity journey seriously and done it well.
Well, I think then you belong to yourself. Because if you like yourself, you belong to yourself. You know, it's like, I like me. I like who I am. I like who I'm becoming, you know? And I think that's the times where I felt the most sense of belonging to the self has been when exactly that, when I'm like, okay, I'm okay with me.
And you said, I wanted to distinguish, you said, I like who I am becoming, not I like who I have become. Because I think at any point when we say, I like who I have become, that means, oh, that's that B point.
It's more fixed, Yeah,
and there's less arrogance in that. Like, I don't find myself arrogant when I like who I'm becoming, you know? It's when I start to fixate on the past achievements or past whatever that then it's like, oh, that's because there's a fragility about my sense of security, my sense of like, and then it's like, I need to drop more hints. I need to do something to fix that. And it's usually that can come across as like egotistical or can come across as, and whatever it comes across as, I'm less interested about that than I know the internal feeling of, oh, I'm feeling very insecure. So I'm trying to compensate, you know, in this way. But when who am I becoming now? I mean, I'm engaged with what is in front of me. Oh yeah. That's when I feel the most secure, I think.
Well, and I think this is where we're going to break and then pick up on the next episode is right at this place that I like who I'm becoming. Yeah. Because that is going to take us into the next stage.
So I got to speak recently, and when I spoke to this group of people, it was a presentation. It was a presentation on this thing of belonging. And I'd never been with these people before. And I sat there beforehand before I was even being introduced. And there's some preliminaries going on. And I felt internally all kinds of things come up.
Yeah.
And because of my practice of awareness, I could pick up on them. And I was able to name them. I'm like, oh, that feeling is a feeling of I need to feel significant. Oh, that feeling is a feeling I need to feel liked. And then the other one was I need to impress them. And if I wasn't aware, they would still be functioning. And they would have come out in my presentation, either in the words I used or the energy I was putting out there. And so I got up and I addressed this very thing of like, my mirror neurons right now want to match up with you and want to synchronize with yours, and yours want to with me. But I have to tell you that as I was sitting here, this is what was coming up for me. And as soon as I put that out there, I was able to let it go. And then I felt myself returning to much more of this like very present and the high side of my type. And so there was a lot more play for me as a 7. There was a lot more laughter. There was a lot more. And it just took that whole thing out. Like, I don't need, because it's not about trying to push that stuff out, trying to get rid of it. Because I can't get rid of that feeling. It's there. I think it's bringing it with you and just with grace, just like, oh yeah, that's part of who I am.
Yeah, totally.
But I want to belong to me right now in this moment. And I want to belong with you, which we're going to get into that next time we talk.
Yeah. To be continued.
To be continued.
Dun, dun, dun.
So thank you so much for joining us. We will continue this conversation next week. And I think this is going to be a big part of what we lean into next year. So I think there's some fertile ground here around this identity, belonging, and contribution piece. Remember to keep an eye out for that newsletter this week so you can sign up to hang out with us live on the 6th. You can follow us on social media at Just Art of Growth. And if you leave us a review, it helps other people discover the show, which is wonderful. But for now, my friends, may you lean into your own story again and explore the ways your identity has been discovered and constructed. And may you remember that you are a powerful creature of choice, a wonder of creation that can create a new trajectory for yourself, and the graceful reminder that we are not finished yet, and we are still painting this masterpiece called our lives. Grace and growth, my friends.